Hello, everyone. Welcome to our series of Labocine, the Labocine Live series, where we're inviting filmmakers and different people at the intersection of science and arts to come speak with us. And we're delighted to have Jahnavi Phalkey with us today, who is somebody that has many hats: a filmmaker, historian of science and technology. The founder of Science Gallery in Bangalore, that's kind of in its early days and organizing events and very exciting. And she is the filmmaker of a film that we're showing on our platform called Cyclotron, that we're just delighted to be able to host on the platform. Jahnavi, welcome to Labocine, and thanks for being here in these strange times that we're in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Jahnavi, I wanted to start, before we get into Cyclotron, I wanted to start by talking a little bit about your background, because it fascinates me. And, you know, obviously we're in a moment right now where science communication is so important. Mm-hmm. And also just kind of the intersection of science and society, and not only communicating, but informing, and the importance of science and art, and the importance of kind of celebrating that in different parts of the world. I was wondering if you could talk. I know it's always hard to speak about ourselves, but a little bit about your background, because you're a filmmaker. All of it is linked through science communication. But yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are right now as well.
Sure. So a little bit about myself. Yes, as you say, it is embarrassing, always. But I'm a historian of science by training, most recently. So I've been a historian of science for about 2 decades now. Before that, I actually studied civics and politics. So it was a serendipitous journey that found me doing history of science and technology. It was something new. I wanted to give it a try, and fell in love with it pretty much as soon as I started, and have stayed with it since. And the areas in which I work are primarily sort of history of the physical sciences, history of statistics, history of aeronautics. Those are the areas that have interested me, and therefore, that's the kind of work I have done. You can also describe it sort of as transnational, global, the words that we kind of use these days to describe anything that's not European or American.
I know. Yeah.
But trying to integrate in the most meaningful manner possible histories of places like India, China, into the story of 20th century science. So you can say I'm a historian of the long 20th century in that sense. Mm-hmm. And it's so the filmmaking happened accidentally again. I made friends who were filmmakers, and I always thought they were very cool. And so and this was when I was younger, of course, and I always told myself I should make a film too, and when there's a useful story to tell. And when you're trying to do too many things, as you yourself know, it's very hard to find time to do anything, with complete attention, and as a result of which things take much longer, right? Because you're building sort of, bit by bit. So it looks like not much progress is being made, but eventually you have 2 things instead of 1, and that has its own sort of satisfaction, of course. So filmmaking in that sense happens serendipitously because of my friends, although I didn't sort of pick up on it with intent, in fact, until I had my first proper academic job. So it's teaching at King's College London, and we used to get like an annual grant, like a small grant, which you could use for a conference, or to buy books, or to buy equipment, or whatever we wanted. And that year I kept my grant too late, where you're trying to use it in the best manner possible, and then you find like, oh shoot, like if I don't use it up now, it's gone. And serendipitously, again, that word you will hear from me very often, I noticed a course in practical documentary filmmaking at the University College London. And so I was like, okay, let me register for this and use my grant money in this manner. And so I did, I mean, so it's not like it wasn't ever on my mind, but it wasn't, it was one of those things like, I wish I could play football kind of thing, right? But then I registered, and most of my course mates were very sober people, so we were all kitted out on day one, right? Like they gave us entry level filming kits, and fabulous, just absolutely fabulous to have that in your hand on the first day. And they were, they're very, very sober people who went and shot in London, a little bit here, a little bit there, learned how to put it together. And I'm like, okay, what can I do? I mean, the sort of the kind of the kind of braveness that only comes with not knowing what you're walking into. So I was like, I'm going to go to India and I'm going to shoot something. And and that's exactly what I did. In fact, what I did was, there was a chapter that did not make it into my thesis. So I studied 6 different labs for my thesis, and then 3 of those went into making my book. And so I had interesting research about 3 other labs that had not made it into papers or books. And I told myself, okay, if I write a paper, probably about 10 people will read it. But if I make a film, then, maybe something else. So, that was, so all of this is kind of afterthought. I don't think I thought so much at that point of time. I was like, okay, so I'm going to go to India and shoot. I'm going to make a proper film out of this experience. And then I was like, okay, so there's this story I know, and it's actually an interesting story. So why don't I do that? So that's exactly what I did. I took my kit, went to India, and asked a friend of mine who's a cinematographer if he wouldn't mind coming to film with me. That I was not going to pay him, but I was going to cover all his costs. And he agreed. That's what friends do. And for that, I'm grateful to him. And so we went, the 2 of us, and we spent, I think, 8 days in Chandigarh, and we filmed, and we came back. And then it took me 7 years to finish it.
Seems about
because
right.
I was working, but because lots of other things were happening. But yeah, that's I'll wait for you to ask the story. But yeah, that's the kind of journey.
I think it's the average, like it's the mean like the average time for making a film, for editing a film is like 10 plus minus 3 years.
Yes, totally. So yeah, so that's what it was. I mean, finding an editor was my challenge. So whenever someone's asked me now, what did you learn, out of making this film? I mean, I've made one, and I know I do have the ambition and a small grant to make the next one, which I'm still thinking about. But my biggest learning was that I am really, at the end of the day, I was a historian of science. I went and filmed like a historian.
Yeah.
I went and collected lots and lots of interviews. So lots of talking heads, and literally what I today understand after having edited the film, no B-roll whatsoever, right? Like literally not. So I came back with lots of words. So, but only words don't make films. I mean, you need images, and you need sort of moving, you need ambience, you need a hell of a lot of other things, which we made, and that itself is also an interesting learning. But so I finding an editor proved in the first 3 years to be like, I think, when was it, 12, 13, 14, 15, yeah, so the first 3 years I tried with 3 different editors. It didn't even go past them watching the footage.
Right.
The first one just came back to me and said, you don't have a film, actually, maybe you could make an installation instead. The second person said, this is, you're going to need a physicist to edit this. And the third person said, why don't you complete a paper edit, and after that we'll talk. And none of that was tough. I was able to, in a sense, process or grasp.
Let's talk a little bit about the film actually before we because one thing that I was really interested in, well, one aspect is being a historian of science and making a film, and the idea that the film is almost like an extension to your research, right? Almost like an extension to
Yes.
that you were treating it as a film, but at the same time it was part of your thesis, which I find fascinating, because sometimes we think of films as being tangential or like supporting material used for communication, but it was an integral part of your research, right? To be able to kind of get like trace that history about the cyclotron. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the film, which I got a chance to see twice actually, and tell me a little bit about how would you describe it. Of course, it's a film that also pays homage to to the science in India, but it also what I thought was fascinating is that it gets into these kind of personal stories about how these scientists met, and kind of it's almost like this like circle of people that met at a specific time and worked together. And I love also the story of how they shipped the cyclotron to India, and also I forget his name, but the main scientist was mentioning how it was important for him to go back to India, that he wanted to actually that he didn't feel comfortable being in the US. So it's an interesting film because it sits both at kind of the history of of science in India, but it's also about about breakthrough, about kind of the future of science, about the now we think about the Large Hadron Collider and all these things. But yeah, tell us a little bit about how you would describe the film.
Yeah. So if you were to sum up the story of what's in the film, it is the story of the world's oldest functional cyclotron today. It was the third ever cyclotron to be built at in the world. It was built at the University of Rochester, United States. And in 1965, it was decommissioned. And in 67, it was sent to India, where it eventually landed up in Chandigarh at the Punjab University Department of Physics in Chandigarh, where it has kept running to date.
Wow.
And so, on the one hand, it is the story of an extraordinary machine. It's with which you do everyday science, right? And it has had these two lives. But what prompted me to make the film about this particular story, as opposed to the other two labs, which I also could have made a film about at that point in time, because I had these three labs that I potentially had research for, is that this history was more about the people, and exactly as you identified, the camaraderie between them, the effort, and the sheer it's astonishing. It's astonishing because more than half the team had never seen a cyclotron in their lives. They'd never worked with one. And what they have in front of them is a disassembled, massive electronic equipment.
Right.
It's like
Lego blocks for advanced
precisely, right?
level. Yeah.
How do you when you see the film, you see the wirings of it, right? Like and much of it, how do you know what goes where? How do you know what works? And remember, when they assembled this, it was all valves and transistors, not solid state supplies, right? So so one part of it is the sheer astonishing accomplishment of reassembling and a recalcitrant machine. I think the context one has to remember is that the first cyclotrons, right, like of the 1930s, the one in Paris barely worked. The one in Göttingen barely worked. There were many cyclotrons that did not actually work to full capacity. There was one in India, which they started building in the early 1940s. That kind of worked, but again, sort of barely worked, right? And that was in Calcutta. So it is of that species, unlike, say, a Van de Graaff machine or a Cockcroft Walton or other comparable machines of the time, which were fairly reliable. Cyclotrons were not, because just to get the vacuum and the magnetic field and the electrical field and the vacuum to sort of get working, you needed several hours of calibration. And then once it was stabilized, you worked with it. And so what was not self-evident was made to work a second time with the same 100% of the same parts is just, fabulous, by a team of people, again, who weren't trained to do this. And the second thing is they've kept it running. But I think, so for me, it was a story of the warmth that I experienced in Chandigarh when I went there to do my research. I just felt that it lent itself beautifully to making a film. Also, in a way, because I felt compelled that I wanted their words to speak to whoever was listening, rather than have me mediate that story through words and write it. I can do that. I'm going to try that, in fact, and write a paper. 10 people will read it. But
what did so to that point, because I'm interested in that, what do you think video, the fact that you were recording this, right? And also the fact that you don't necessarily, I mean, I love kind of the more abstract B-roll, kind of like those shots of, I think, but why was it important for you to capture it with images, kind of capture them? And I'm guessing also you see them, right? And you kind of get a sense of who these people were, and you get a sense of their history and archives and the incorporation of kind of like a visual history. But for you as a filmmaker, why, what captivated you about the idea of actually, making a film and recording images of these stories?
I think it was the love of the people who worked there for the machine. It was their life, and they even say that on occasion. More than one person says that on occasion, that that's their life. And that to me was something that stayed with me. I mean, I had been there I think about 4 times before, for my research, before I actually went there to film. And of course, when I was doing my research, I had no idea I was going to go back to film. So I had a certain rapport with them. They understood me understood, I don't know, understood is probably a big word, but in a sense, they didn't see me as much of an outsider as they would have if I had just gone there the first time and wanted to film.
Right.
So they knew I was interested in their story. They spoke to me as if I was a part of the story. So at many moments they begin in the middle of something, and then, I tried my best to give it context. So there was that rapport. But yes, what was most important was that I wanted them to speak their own stories to anyone who wanted to listen. And I wanted to keep myself out of it, as a result of which my editor and I, the one with whom I finally worked, who just turned out to be absolutely fabulous, we decided we were not going to do voiceover. We were not going to do text cards. We were not going to do any of that. We were going to let them tell the story, and we were going to use their words and create the story and weave it together. And in the end, I think we did manage that. It's almost like they pick up the baton from each other.
Right. They each kind of continue the story. And it does feel, I mean, I think that, oftentimes when you see science documentaries, you have this kind of reflex, to add voiceover, or to superimpose your own story on it. And there's something really fascinating where you kind of, because also you're a historian, you really just kind of, there's something very almost like ethnographic about the piece. You're letting them speak about it. And but there was one moment that I was going to ask you about, which is because we don't hear you, but there are moments where we catch glimpses of you. And there was one moment that I love, actually, where you speak off camera and you say, how do you describe, what the cyclotron does, or how would you describe this to somebody that doesn't know anything about, about the field? And I remember the person that was being interviewed said, like, oh, that's tough. And then they started kind of explaining it. But I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that moment, and also the importance of you communicating this to kind of a wider audience.
Yeah. So as you rightly started out saying, when most of the documentaries about science or around science that we see, and I'm putting sort of conservation or wildlife documentaries entirely out of this category. I'm talking about sort of, general science based documentaries. There's a desire to explain, there's a desire to teach, there's a desire to celebrate, and there's a desire to communicate discovery. So it's always about something is there, and here's why it's interesting, and here's why you should know about it. And I will not deny that some of it is there in me too. I mean, that's why I want to make it, because I really want people to see this story, right? Like, I want people to see what's happened here. But I want it in many ways to go beyond that, because there was, I could have made this story as a celebration of the world's oldest functional cyclotron. I could have made this story as a celebration of the technicians who managed to put it together, without actually having ever seen or worked on a cyclotron before. Or I could have made it into a celebration of the main physicist, whose accomplishment wasn't trivial, because this was the very first machine outside of the Department of Atomic Energy Control. At that point of time, such machines for experimental nuclear physics work, across the world, less so in America, but across the world, were sort of, heavily controlled by departments of atomic energy because of their strategic value.
Right.
So, it could have been a celebration of either of those, or it, or the machine itself. But I didn't want to let go of any of these aspects. And I wanted to use the various registers or the voices of the people for the various registers to come through in their words, right? And just wanted to go beyond and say, okay, we're not celebrating anything. We are not, we're not teaching anyone anything. We are not explaining anything. This is potentially an extraordinary machine. This is what everyday science looks like. Let's talk to a bunch of people who love what they do.
Yeah.
And I hope some of that kind of came through, and some of that desire to move beyond this largely used format of communicating rather than engaging, rather than calling people in and saying, look, these guys, we're all in it in a sense together. Here are some people like you and me. They do something else. They love this. Let's see what it's all about.
Yeah.
And
how do you feel because I'm guessing the film has quite a bit of value to you, because it's kind of like it almost sits as an archival piece, right? You were able to gather all of these testimonials. But I was wondering, what was your experience also, because this was, was this your first kind of feature-length film that you had embarked on? Yeah.
First ever.
What was your experience in terms of the reception, both in the scientific community in India, but kind of, how was that experience for you in terms of how the film was received once you started sharing it?
Yeah. So we released it August last year and released it online because, pandemic. I was actually surprised by the number of views I got in the first. So we had it online for about 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And the film had something like, over 2,000 views. Yeah. And I was really astonished, because I didn't expect that at all. Yeah. I didn't think people would want to see something so geeky in a way, right? Like, I care about the people, I care about the machine, I care about the history. I didn't know why anyone else should necessarily, and so this was also a question we asked ourselves: who is this film for? Right. Is this film going to go to universities and schools and colleges in India? Is it going to be shown, primarily to in educational institutions? Is it a film festival kind of film? Is it etc.? And again, I'm very happy for Tanya, my editor, because we found ourselves discussing all of these things, and we found ourselves agreeing on things, right? Like she took me very seriously, and I think that's a privilege for someone who's working for the first time on a film and has no clue, as to how things how words become films.
There are good things about that as well, because you don't have all the reflexes of
That is, yes.
what a film is, or what a film needs to be, or what is the audience. I think those can be also somewhat of traps to some extent when we're making films.
I can understand. I can understand, because in academia, I mean, I'm very much a part of the thing, in a sense, right? Like, and so I completely appreciate what you just said. And so the decision we took at that point of time was to say that here's a story we want to tell, here's how we see it, here's what we appreciate about it, let's make it in that way, and let's see who wants to see it.
Right.
And so I've had responses from the scientific community ranging from, we didn't even know this machine existed,
right,
to this is such a, we should have pride in this story kind of thing. Kind of response from physicists, senior physicists, saying that actually we should be really proud of these people. And to people who are not from the sciences, saying, I never thought I would actually enjoy a film about science. And my parents, who are not scientists, neither of them is a scientist. I mean, they just love the people. They said, my God, these people are so dedicated. They so love their work. And so that's kind of, so we didn't know anything about it, to the dedication, to the hardships. And those who kind of knew the story and had sort of, a slightly more advanced starting point for seeing the film, they felt it carried in a way the pathos of what doing science and in India feels like, and the hurdles that you confront in order to be able to do some of the most simplest things.
What fascinates me about it also is that you don't necessarily separate the science from the personalities, and also kind of the sense of belonging, the sense of where the scientists want to be. Like, all of that is included in the film, right? It's about the machine, and it's also about the people. And I feel that sometimes when you watch films, especially films that are about technology or about kind of breakthroughs, you have a tendency of kind of wanting to push forward the narrative of what this means, and less kind of focus more on the universal and less on those individual anecdotes. But those anecdotes about even the wiring and like how this, they're kind of showing you almost feel there's like an organic feeling to the machine. And also, because we're talking about these like machines that are kind of in the realm also of the Large Hadron Collider, there's something where it's more accessible because we understand almost like the mechanics of it. Whereas when you see something at CERN, it's just so above your head, it's like animations of like particles colliding that you don't necessarily fully understand what. You also don't fully understand. I don't know if you ever saw this film called Particle Fever. Did you ever see that film?
No, I didn't. Should I?
It's a good film. Yeah, it's about the Large Hadron Collider, but it also kind of follows different people that were involved with that.
Okay, I would love. Yeah.
But what about? Let me ask you one more question about the reception. What about the cyclotron itself? After making the film, is it still working now? Has there been kind of a kind of a rediscovery of the importance of the cyclotron? I mean, as you were mentioning, there's a lot of like politics involved about who funds who under whose kind of guardianship it is. What has happened to the cyclotron since since you made the film and over the last few years, I guess.
No, just a year. Last August.
Last year,
yeah. So pandemic, so not much, and I haven't still been able to actually go and show it there. That's what I want to do.
Oh, wow.
I'd actually love to go back there and show it with the technicians, getting them all over, etc. So I'm in touch with the families of some of the people involved, and they would also very much like to have that kind of a screening. And I think that's when we will probably see something come of it. And I hope, like you said, I mean, I want something to come of it, not only for Chandigarh and the efforts that were carried out there. So, an appreciation for that history, an appreciation for that effort and that experience and that expertise. But also sort of beyond that, an appreciation for what history of science in India is about, like, and so that we start looking at other places where we are not constantly looking for stories to celebrate or flags to, in a way, pin on something or the other, but um, just give dignity to the day-to-day life of science, in a sense. I mean, which is true not just of India.
Yeah.
Actually, it's true pretty much everywhere. I mean, we can see several films made about Marie Curie, but do we see anything where in a sense, she's one of the many people in that lab who work.
Right. Kind of the more like I don't know if the word mundane is the word, but the kind of the.
I've used that word.
Yeah, the mundane is good. I mean, I think mundane is good because it grounds, right? It humanizes the people.
Yes.
They're not. It's not like these people were just kind of like outlined or highlighted as we sometimes see in the film, but they're kind of part of like a bigger community. Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, because the mundane is extremely important, because often how we humanize heroes is by showing that they get angry and that they fall in love and that they also suffer, but that alone is not humanizing, right? Because I mean, we are if you look at ourselves, I mean, we're a part of a very banal life, right? Like and around us, in a sense. And if you look at, even just to come back to Marie Curie's story, I mean, the number of women who studied with her, worked with her, went away and did all sorts of fabulous things across the world, including Vienna, there's that, whatnot. I mean, that would be the story to her own daughter, her husband, and so just kind of be able to do that, right? Like to not just have a theatrical spotlight, so to speak, on one thing, but more broad view,
like a panorama. Yeah. So
exactly.
Let me ask you. So now that you've made Cyclotron, of course, hoping to show it, in post-pandemic and in cinemas and back in these kind of research labs, has this given you interest to make more films? Because I want to enter briefly into the other things that you do. But yeah, I'm just interested if it gave you like the film bug, the film appetite. Do you have other stories or other things that you want to tackle with film, or?
Yes, I do. I do think I will make other films, and probably start with doing something small on my computer at home. Maybe not go out film as in go shoot, but like actually make something with what I have, like the B-roll footage we created for the film, including the mistakes that we made. So the abstract thing that you talked about, the circular light thing. That was the moment when I felt my camera died, because we moved too close to the magnet, so the camera got magnetized, and we thought not only that we lost all footage for the day, but that the camera was gone, and that was the last thing it captured. So it's there to remind me that, dude, don't push it too far. So, or at least know
the limits of technology.
Yes,
technology can only capture so much.
True. Yes, so I do want to make something. I'll probably do something small during this year if I can. Maybe do something that I really said I would do, which is like make a 5 or 10 minute film.
Yeah.
And not a not like bite something which I can't even grasp. So I'll do a small one.
Do you feel that the films do you consider them to be an extension to your work as a historian? Has it become, because I'm assuming there's a lot other aspects to the work as a historian in terms of course, writing and documenting and archiving. Is video kind of do you consider it as kind of like an integral part of how you as a researcher operate now, or?
I would like to continue to do that. So yes, The answer to that is yes. But I think I am actually willing now to make something a little more experimental. I don't necessarily know how. So if you look at pretty much all my B-roll, which is historical photographs and mistakes from the shoot, I think if I were to put all of those things together, or I don't know if other filmmakers do it. They probably do. Like, I mean, as historians, when you write your book and it goes out into the world, and it's like, oh my god, if I wrote it today, I would write it so differently.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's like
so
I can't even watch my own film. So
yeah, exactly. It's just hard. It's just hard. So when I think of how I would have done this differently, if I had, because I remember I started out to make a 10 to 12-minute film.
Wow.
Except I have no idea what happened once I went into the field, or went to the site to do my thing. I thought, for example, that I would have everyone sit in front of the control room where I have the lead scientist sitting in the very first shot. And if I had everyone sit there and speak, and not anywhere else, that would be visually a really interesting thing. And then have a B-roll which is the entire machine.
Wow.
Of course, it's a different kind of film, because then you don't get the noise and the chaos of walking into the air conditioning and cooling room where this guy's trying to tell you what this does, or where he turns on this power supply, and then you're not going to get all of that, or the young student experimenting and setting up the target chamber and all of that. So you won't get that, but you get something else which is visually kind of interesting in a different way. And so I've thought of that. I don't think I would make this very film in a different way, because I've learned so much that I don't think I can even begin to unravel it to make another one. But if I look at what I did to add value to it, so where I finally understood that moving images has images in it and not moving words. So I think that's the bit I would work on in making a short thing, to see what I can. So I think I'm historically inclined. I like to think historically, but I don't know if I'll let that be, because fidelity mattered to me a lot in this film. Fidelity to the story, to the people, integrity to the to the people, again, to the story.
Yeah, of course.
I want to try and see what I can do when I can leave some of that burden, so to speak. I don't think it's a bad burden, but it is some of that responsibility. Let me not say burden. Some of that responsibility behind, and try to make something just because it's interesting.
Yeah,
and
I think science film oftentimes has this, this idea of fidelity or accuracy, or trying to making sure that you're telling the things, and the fear of sensationalizing or misconstruing the data. But at the same time, I agree with you. We should have keeping in mind that responsibility, we should be able to also experiment, and kind of and tell the stories in ways. And I think I agree with you that what's important is to remain true to the people, and to have them. Just like a small anecdote for me, sometimes I have scientists tell me really far-fetched ideas, and I think of myself as a filmmaker. I was like, oh, I'm going to help them enable with visuals. I'm going to help them kind of like fulfill their own dreams or fantasies, and it's not necessarily faking science, but it's kind of being. But I think, and I was also thinking, as a historian, it must be interesting to watch this footage, and it'd be almost like a self-reflexive. You're watching it and you're kind of thinking about the history through your own, on screen. It must be kind of an interesting like feedback loop in terms of thinking about the history, but also thinking about all of these questions around fidelity and accuracy and capturing this moment.
It is. I mean, it is. Editing was tortuous. I mean, not only because I did not do it before, or that I had no experience doing it, but again, it really helped that I had the right person working with me.
Right.
So we did a paper edit. Eventually, I learned how to do one. And what was utterly delightful was that we had come back with the same starting point and the same end point from the footage. And so I was like, okay, so we get each other and we see the same things in it. We ended up with neither of the two, but we knew we were on the same page at that point. And so that was really good. That was really good. So no, so this, I mean, it's been it's been an exercise in learning not only about what historians do, right? Like, so it's put a camera on me and my work as well, because that's when I realized, like, I do words, and I do words only, right? And how limiting that can be.
Yeah.
And and therefore, how can words do better things? So I'm hoping when I write the next book, before I die, sometime, it'll be better for that, right? Because it's just helped me think about my own. I hate that word because everybody uses it now, but practice, right? What do
and another one of those words that's thrown out there,
yeah.
Also because it's an interesting, like, we all practice, right? To some extent.
Of course we do. Of course we do. I mean, who doesn't? Yeah. No, so I mean, it's helped me understand better what I do as a historian, and how I might actually do it better. And I think my being a historian helped me look for cohesion in that story. I knew it would come through words, and it did come through words. So that's probably why next time I want to see if I can bring it out through image. And it's almost like a little challenge. But no, I think that self-reflection, right? Like, and it holds a mirror back at you. I think any which way making a film would do that, and at least that was my feeling. But having these two, in a sense, professional forms that I engaged in, or forms of expression, not even professional forms of expression that I engaged in, it sort of made it all the more interesting to think of it that way. Yeah.
Wow. I wanted to speak a little bit before I could speak for hours because I'm so like fascinated by this topic. But another thing that you do, I mean, which we have to speak about, is the work with the the work as a science communicator, and this new role, that you have as the founder of the Science Gallery, and kind of that mission as well in your life, in addition to being a historian and still affiliated with King's College, no? Still kind of overseeing work there to some extent.
Yes.
So being, an educator, a historian, a filmmaker, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about the Science Gallery and what types of. You mentioned also that there was an exhibit that was just about to start, and tell me more. And also because Bangalore is such a fascinating, area where there's so much, new research, new technology, and I mean there's NCBS and India Institute of Technology, all these places. If you could talk a little bit about
sure.
that.
Sure. So as you're aware, Science Gallery, the Science Gallery International Network, has 8 galleries across the world, and all of them, apart from Bangalore, are on university campuses. So they are owned by universities and are an integral part to the research, education, and outreach missions of the universities. So Trinity College, Dublin, King's London, University of Melbourne, etc., etc. Now, Bangalore is a slight outlier in that we are the only independent gallery in the network. And so we have the government of Karnataka as a founding partner. And we work very closely with the Indian Institute of Science and the National Center for Biological Sciences that you mentioned, so IISc, NCBS, and Shrishti Institute of Art, Design, and Technology. So we work closely with 3 of the institutions rather than 1, which is what most of my sibling galleries work with, or directors of sibling galleries work with. But the mandate is the same. And the mandate, as it started out in Dublin with Michael John Gorman, who's now working with Biotopia in Munich, the mandate was to bring scientists and artists together to create public engagement with science. And what we have ended up doing in Bangalore is to strengthen that model and to build on its success, to do a couple of things. So what we've done is we have extended what is essentially a public engagement platform to become, or well, to incorporate a more expanded view of what a public space for science should look like. So what we have, and our building is under construction, it'll be ready in another year or so. So what we have coming up is the public engagement bit, of course. And then we have a public lab complex, which is in the same, in fact, interspersed between the exhibition galleries are the labs. And we have a community initiatives. So spaces that are used by groups of people to do whatever they want, right? Like, and by whatever they want, meaning public engagement with science.
Right.
So it might be, citizens groups that want to talk about conservation, or a group of young people who want to build guitars, or a bunch of geeks who want to work on Arduinos, or sci-fi geeks who want to just come and read together. Right. So it's so that bit. So if you look at the three parts of our activities, the public engagement has our strongest fingerprint in a sense, because in a way we program the public engagement thing, a public engagement bit of it. The public lab complex will be run on a fellowship basis, so year-long fellowships. There, while we do select the fellows, we don't select what they do, right? Like they come in with their own program, and the only conditions are that they have to work across labs. So you can't come and work in a natural sciences lab and go back. You've got to propose something that makes use of one of our 6 lab spaces. So we have a generalist, but sort of postgraduate level natural sciences lab, microscopy, darkroom, tissue culture, all of that. We have a materials library and a workshop. So, the delicate part indoors and the slightly less delicate part, which is the lathes and whatnot, in a slightly more open area. We have a new media lab, because what would you do today without one?
Right.
A food lab. And we have a black box theater, which is of course a theater, but it's also a blank space that you can look at as, sort of a slightly less privileged cousin to the Futures Lab at Ars Electronica, for example.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So which is jigged for all kinds of sound, light, data.
Yeah, like installations, yeah.
Exactly, and lasers, so you can study kinetics, you can have a performance, you can, you can do AR, VR expressions, you can do all of that work in that room. So the condition for the fellows is that they use more than one of these labs in whatever project they propose. And ideally also in collaboration, so that, you can have a cohort of people working across these places. And then, yeah, so here, so more of our fingerprints on the public engagement, lesser on the public lab complex, and least on the the community initiatives. So that's the plan. The building will be hopefully ready, pandemic and everything else permitting, by the end of next year.
Wow. And next year also with all of these labs are going to be,
yes.
Wow. So it's a massive space that's going to be. Yeah.
It's big enough. It's not humongous. So in our labs, for example, we'll take about 20 people at one point of time, no more than that, because anything bigger than that is industrial scale. And, at this stage, I think we need to grow a model more than anything else of how something like this can function. And, get a buy-in, and then hopefully, maybe at some point it'll expand. But what we've done is we started doing the public engagement part of it before the building opened. And so we've done 3 exhibitions so far, 2 physical and 1 entirely online. And the one that you just spoke about, which is Contagion, and it's called Contagion, in fact, entirely belonging to this moment, opens in 7 days' time. And it's entirely online. So I'd love for you to come and visit. The thing about our public engagement programming is that alongside an exhibition, so we call it an exhibition season, and the programming is integral to the exhibition. So in a sense, it's not just an accompanying thing, but it's integral. So exhibits become starting points for programming, where we explore both the back end of the programming and use the exhibit to ask, sort of newer questions, get people to reflect on it in a sense. So we have public lectures with tutorials, we have masterclasses and workshops. We also have a film series, and our colleague and dear friend Surabhi curated the first film series we had during our second exhibition. So we have a film series this time too. We are not showing Contagion, the Hollywood film, but we are showing other more other interesting, equally if not more interesting and lovely
And
films.
what will be this exhibit? The Contagion exhibit online will be kind of like a virtual space. What's the format of the exhibit going to be like?
It's a virtual space, entirely virtual space,
Okay.
and it's free to everyone and everywhere. So that's true for all our programming, for all the galleries, is that it's open for everyone and made accessible for everyone.
And wow, it sounds unbelievable. And so I'm assuming that you're also part of the kind of the bigger network of science galleries. Do the science galleries work with each other? Is there kind of a dialogue in terms of what each one does? I mean, I guess there is kind of that responsibility of doing things locally and collaborating with science and art organizations on site. But in terms of the kind of that broader umbrella, there's is there kind of like this cross dialogue happening between the different science galleries, because there's so many now?
Yes, very much so, very much so. So we work across various, to use another of those words, verticals.
Yeah.
So we have a research arm of our collaboration. So we hope to do research both in public engagement and learning, informal learning, but also other kinds of research that can be carried out at multi-site. Well, we have the possibility of doing it at multiple sites, and therefore come up with interesting findings. So so we are working on that. We have a joint youth symposium where young people, so our target audience is young adults, right? Like we mainly work with the age group of 15 to 28. Doesn't mean others are ruled out, but that's sort of, we try to sort of cater strongly to this age group. And so we have an annual youth symposium where young people from all the network, from across the network meet together, talk together. Monthly meetings, town halls, and we also do joint calls. So on occasion, for example, you could either build on an exhibition that has been done by one of the sibling galleries, or you could have a joint call where you call for submissions across the world and both are simultaneously programming. So we've done that too. So we do share, and we are growing. I mean, as you know, many in the network are quite young. I mean, even we started programming only in October 2019. Yeah. So it's growing, and it's growing in interesting ways. It's
what I find fascinating also in this kind of realm of science communication is that the research space and the exhibition space are those lines are being blurred more, and I find that to be such a fascinating. That there's kind of like this feedback mechanism where, you're doing, it's the same as film, right? That you make films, yes. It becomes an extension to the research, then the research feeds into other films, and it's just kind of like a cycle that feeds itself. And I think that especially when you think about the traditional science museum, right, which is, very kind of like colonial and just like entering and, observing animals or understanding how things work is now being broken down, and Science Gallery has always been a huge inspiration in terms of what they do, and it's so great. Yeah, I'm very, very excited to hear more how things progress there, and of course, if there's any interest in doing more film, with the site, that's let us know.
Absolutely, no, would be great. Now that I know. Absolutely. I mean, because we want films to become an integral part, as I said, of the exhibition season. What we've started calling our exhibitions in Bangalore, the Living Archive project in Berlin, right? So we've started calling our exhibitions living exhibitions, because we want to bring that kind of dynamism. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that's curated, for lack of a better word, and put out there for someone to come and see and learn from and leave. But it's something that's there, it's a proposition in a sense, or a provocation at a better time. This is not a moment for that. Yeah. And you get and it changes. It changes as people respond. So things grow during the exhibition, things change, new things get added, things, might get dropped out. So far, we haven't done that. But films also, if it's, so we are not so strong on narrative. And by that, I mean, we don't want a strong narrative to the exhibition because we don't have a story to tell. What we want are people to, is the opportunity for people to come and find a way to build their own story. What we have certainly is a strong message.
Yeah.
But we want to be able to offer the opportunity for every visitor who's willing to engage to discover a way to that message, right? And for someone it might be through the films, for someone it might be through the lectures, for someone it might be through the masterclass, for someone it might be through an exhibit. For someone it might be our social media, mini exhibits, or for someone it might be our small videos, whatever be it, right? Find your own way, build your own story, come, in a way, assemble something, do something, engage, rather than sort of, come and consume. Because participate also, and again, one learns only by building on existing models. I mean, you learn by learning very well what's already there. Participation also calls for an engagement with something that's given, right? Like, here's my agenda, now participate in it, right? Like, whereas what we want to do is to not call for participation, but actually call for, ways in which it might even disturb us, right? Like that, this doesn't work actually. So how do we do this now, right? Like, and so that's why the propositions and provocations, I think hopefully that model might work. We're trying.
Right, almost like the idea of there being trial and error, and
yes,
and coming back to what you were saying before about, I always find it fascinating, this term like mistakes. When you were talking about your film, like, oh, there were mistakes. It's such an interesting term in the science world because everything that we do is ultimately kind of like a series of mistakes and trials and errors, and I think it's this kind of organic, unwieldy organism that we don't fully know how it's going to develop. I think it's really, really powerful, and so there will be the ability for people to actually visit the science gallery, kind of navigate through these spaces, visit the labs. That will be possible as well. Engage in the public events as well.
Yes. Yes. So the labs are, so we've made sure that the labs are sort of modeled on a fishbowl. So, the galleries and the labs are interspersed, and the labs have glass walls. So you can always see what's happening.
Voyeuristic, looking into what's happening.
Absolutely. And there'll be open days and evenings when people can actually come in and sit and talk to the fellows. So we have 2 theory labs, which are blank sort of spaces, where people come and, work in progress can be discussed, calling in smaller audiences or bigger audiences into our activity hall. So that kind of stuff can happen. And, depending on what audiences you want, you might want to call in other researchers, right? Like, and present a project, or you might want to open it to the general public. So we've developed various formats for it. But the proof of the pudding, of course, we'll find out when we start to eat it.
As horrific as the moment is, and I know India has been hit very hard with the pandemic, but there's never been more of a pressing time for these types of initiatives. So I think I've noticed it also. Many times people consider what we do as being niche or being that, and now it's just like it's right in our face, the importance of science in our everyday lives, and obviously it's not the best way to wake people up, but it happens. So, but Jahnavi, I could talk for hours, but we're going to be continued.
Yes,
for
absolutely.
sure. And congratulations on Cyclotron. Please continue making films. I personally think historians make the best films. There's another, I'm gonna just put this out there before we stop recording, but there's another amazing historian of science, Peter Gallison. Do you know Peter Gallison?
Of course. Yes, of course.
And he's a filmmaker as well, and has made some incredible films. So
True.
I would love to see the future work that you make, and hopefully you'll have enough hours to sleep with all of these roles that you have in. But yeah, please see Cyclotron on the platform, and then we'll let everybody know about the future screenings, and stay tuned. When does the exhibit open?
Oh, on the 30th of April at 6:30 p.m. India time.
30th of April. Okay, so we'll make sure to post about it also on our social media. Thank you.